Hello, and welcome to Conversations with Reverend G. I am Reverend Grenetta Mason, aka Reverend G, and I'm here every Monday night on WEMS Radio from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m., bringing you spiritual conversations. I have guests from all walks of life with different perspectives. We talk about spirituality, we talk about current events, we talk about things that can support you in living your best life. Each week, my guests share with you their spiritual journeys in hope that we can inspire you with some of the tools and some of the practices that we use. My thing is the spiritual toolkit. And what practices do you have in your spiritual toolkit? So we get to explore some of the practices that can support you. And we look at spirituality from, a practical point of view. How does it support you in your everyday life? We want to take the mystery out of it. So when my guests come on, we talk about everything from education to comedy to spirituality. And most of my guests bring a lot of unique qualities. So my goal is to support you in living your best life with grace and ease. And you can find me on Facebook every day as Reverend Grenetta Mason, and I'm also on Instagram as Rev Grenetta. So let's bring on my guest tonight. My guest tonight is Laura Stang. Laura is an educator and a creative. Laura is been living in New York City and working in New York City. And when she's not working, you can find her in the gym or trying out some new recipe. Hey, Laura, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me, Grenetta. It's so good to be here.
Yep, I'm so excited to have you. I've been looking forward to having you on the show. Laura and I met at Momentum, so we have some great momentum experiences, right?
Yes.
But Laura, just introduce yourself to everybody.
Yeah, so as Reverend Grenetta said, I am a educator. I work here in New York City. I teach teachers. So I have spent most of my adult life trying to understand how people think and how people learn, and using that both in coaching and mentoring in the field of tech, as well as teaching teachers. And in my free time, as Grenetta mentioned, I do a lot of creative endeavors. I've done writing, I've done stand-up comedy, I've done dance, so martial arts. So yeah, kind of a jack of all trades, master of none, but also having a fulfilling life, trying out lots of different things for sure.
Right. I would say, and when I looked at everything, I was like, oh my gosh, she has so many things. So there's so many great things that we could talk about, right? And we could start off talking about being in education, right? And being a teacher of teachers, right? Well, how did you get onto that track? That you decided that would be your career for now. Because I always talk about how young you are and how much you've accomplished. And I'm so proud of all the things you've done, right? So I'm always like singing praises, right?
Yeah.
So talk about how you came to this track right now, because I know there's just so many things that you've done.
Yeah. So when I was in college, honestly, college was really rough for me. I went to a really competitive, really like high pressure school. Mm-hmm. So I think it was either my freshman or my sophomore year, I was already burnt out. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do 2 more years of this and get a career and go forward. And I had changed during college. I changed my major like 7 times. I started out as like pre-med. I thought I wanted to be a doctor, and then I thought I wanted to be a linguist, and then I wanted to be a writer and a dancer, and I was just like kind of all over the place. I was a chemistry major, I was a mechanical engineering major, and so I was kind of like not knowing what to do with my life. And to make ends meet while I was in college, I was tutoring. So I would tutor high school kids in SAT and stuff like that. And every time I tutored and I left my tutoring session, I just felt like as if a weight had been lifted off of me. Like no matter how bad of a day I had, I felt better. And I was like, maybe there's something to this feeling, right? Like maybe I should pursue that. So yeah, I looked into a lot of different paths in education. I thought about going straight into K-12 education, but I was always good at school and I was always interested in research. So instead I went into a PhD program after finishing undergrad. And from there I decided to become a professor and to teach other people how to teach.
Okay. Yeah, I did see that you were an adjunct at Columbia, and I thought adult education is a whole different field, right? From K-12, as you said, going into adult education is very different in teaching adults. What do you find have been some of the challenges? I think I always try to think of it as we have been in a challenging time right now.
Yeah.
Right? And so over the last year and a half, a lot of different changes and things have come up. What have been some of the challenges for you as an adjunct professor and trainer of teachers?
So many. I mean, I teach both students. I teach at NYU, so my students there are undergrads, and then I also teach at Columbia's Teacher College, so my students there are grad students. And a lot of my students are actually international students. So when teaching, a lot of my students are calling in from, China or other countries. My Chinese students can't usually get onto some calls or onto Google because it's blocked by their government. So like even just getting my own students access to my class has been a struggle. And that's not something you usually expect when you're at like a really prestigious university like Columbia, but just like trying to help people, you're trying to teach people and you're trying to teach them the material. But at the same time, we're all trying to navigate a global pandemic and what does it mean to constantly be at home, and how do you work and study and learn when you're in an environment where you don't usually do those things. So it's been interesting throughout the year as I learn while my students learn about like how do we learn in this environment. And even I've been asking myself questions like, well, what's the importance of grades and what are my students learning and how can I capture what they're learning without holding them to the exact same standards, because they don't have access to the same, tests or discussions or things that we might usually have access to in a physical classroom. So that's definitely been a challenge, is trying to create that connection, but also that like safety in learning when not everyone has access to the same resources. We're not all in the same place.
It's interesting when you talk about international access with countries blocking, and I think about just access, period, in poor community right here, right? I work at an education opportunity center. And in the community that I serve, we had to really work to supply devices. It's an adult education center, but we had to work to supply devices, internet access. And this is right here in Harlem, New York City. The challenges are, I didn't think about it when you said the international student, how far I will go there also. And this whole new, and they talk about, what do you think we're going to come to? What are your thoughts about this whole new, are we going to do this whole blended thing? And how do you think we're going to come back as we go through this? Because a lot of people can be successful doing the online thing. And we've seen a lot of great things happen with this shift, right? So what kind of things are you seeing happening in education and for you?
Yeah, I think technology, even during my life, and as you noted, I'm very young, but I was born in 1990. But even in my life, I feel like technology has changed so much, right, over the course of our lifetime. And so even in the past, 5 years, what we can do with online education has really grown. At the same time, I don't think that the methods we use to ensure quality education have changed, right? It's still connection-based, it's still discussion-based, it's still allowing students to ask complicated questions and solve problems on their own with guidance. And so some of that can be mediated by tech. It's the same kind of stuff you would do in the classroom, but easier. And for some, it's actually, like you said, more difficult, right? So for some students, walking to a classroom where they can just access their teacher directly is actually more accessible to them than having to get a computer, because they don't necessarily have a computer or lights or stable internet at home, right?
Exactly.
So I don't know. I'm kind of wary of this blended learning. One of the things I think about, because I also do advocacy, and one of the things my advocacy groups for like civil justice and social justice in the city have been thinking about too is, how do we meet since we're not meeting in person? For some people, Zoom is more accessible. For others, it's less accessible. So how do we bring kind of everyone to the table and allow them to participate? So I do think hybrid learning might be a thing, not necessarily for everyone, but creating an opportunity for people to connect in the way that's most accessible for them, noting that that way might look different for different students.
Yeah. And then, I think about too with us, at one point we feel we're moving closer to bringing everybody in. And then in one ear you hear, oh, variant, put your mask back on. So then it just shifts, right?
Yeah.
Where are we going? What are we going to do? And it's sometimes too much information for us to really like digest. So I feel for me, it's like, okay, let's just see where we're going and what we're doing. And it's interesting too, when you look at COVID in some states, it's like going crazy again, right?
Yeah.
And then in others, then what do we do? What's the messaging here for us? So yeah, we're still in the midst of it, as I say, right?
We're all trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
While the plane is flying.
Right, exactly. I think about, how we talk about the one consciousness, and how we are a collective creative, right? And if we can focus in as one collective, we can create the change as one, right?
Right.
So I think staying calm about it and saying, okay, well, as one, we know everything is going to work out, right? And having the peace, because sometimes, and that's when I talk about how can spirituality support us, like even right now with so much uncertainty around whether to wear a damn mask or not, right?
Yeah.
What spiritual practices or what can we use to support us, even to feel at peace with that?
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I like to look at when I talk about spirituality, right? How does it support us even with that, You talked about a lot of things. I was thinking about when you were talking about, I love how you talked about being in college and not knowing and trying a lot of different things. And what's good about that is being able to be okay in doing that. When you were doing it, were you okay? You know how you can look back and say,
no, not at all.
No.
I was not okay. I mean, like, you're also so young in college, right? I feel bad for my students. I empathize with my students a lot because I remember being 19 and feeling like, oh, shoot, I only have 1 or 2 years to figure my whole life out, right? Not knowing that I could graduate and then study something different and my careers could change and I could follow. Now that I'm an adult, I feel much more comfortable with the ability to change careers and do what works for my life in the moment. But as a kid, I was like, I have to have my entire life figured out at this moment. Otherwise, I'm not going to be okay, right? And so, no, yeah, I wasn't okay. I mean, I think I had to change because I knew I wasn't happy in any given choice that I made, and I didn't want to be stuck with that choice. But I was terrified about the prospects that I hadn't chosen yet, right? The prospect that I wasn't sure.
And so what would you say to somebody, to college people right now? You say you try to support your students, right? What comes to mind for me is, it doesn't take all that, calm down, but when you're in the midst of it, right, what would you say would be something that can support students? And I would say the thing is there a way we can let them know, oh, it's okay, right?
Yeah. I think role models are really important. And this is why, like, as I've gotten older, I've really appreciated more and more the importance of diversity in role models and representation, because it's really hard. You can hear that somebody else did something, but you don't think you're capable of that. But I think one of the things that usually gives my students ease is like, very young, I have a PhD, you know, I have a well-paying job. And I think a lot of my students really look up to that. And then hearing like, when I was your age, I had no idea what I was doing. And I didn't think I could get a PhD. I didn't think I could handle grad school after undergrad. I was completely burnt out. And it ended up being okay. And I struggled for 2 years after college, and I had all kinds of odd end jobs, and I was a personal assistant, and I, you know, did all these weird one-off things. And then eventually I figured it out. Right. And you can do that too. The goal of, you know, being whatever age you're at. And I think this is as true for 12 as it is for 19, as it is for, you know, 32 is, you know, the person you are today is not going to be the person you are in the future. But if you honor who you are right now as you know it and what you need, and you're open to learning more about yourself, you will find yourself in a place that works for you, even if you don't know what that will look like.
Just it feels like being open to not knowing, and just knowing, being open to not knowing, and being okay with not knowing, right? And just going along and figuring it out, right? Without, and it would be great if you could do it without the panic and all the anxiety, right, that we put around it. That would be the message, but, you know.
Yeah. I think it's hard too, because, you know, it depends on your environment. You know, if the people, like I was at a place where the people around me were freaking out. And so even if I wasn't freaking out at any given moment, I was like, should I be freaking out?
And so, because everybody else is, right?
It's hard to like separate yourself from that and be like, I'm going to be okay. Like not taking on other people's trauma and other people's anxiety, I think can be really hard.
It's very challenging.
And it takes such a strong sense of self to get there.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think you're right. It's just about being open to not knowing and open to learning.
Exactly. And the fact that you brought up outside energies and being in environments where you have to really work hard to not take on the toxicity of an environment. Because I used to say that I worked in a cesspool of negativity. And for me, that was like, you know, it's always trying to suck me in, right?
Yeah.
The whole thing. And really staying out of that is really challenging. So as you said, if everybody around you is freaking out, how do you not think, oh, well, maybe I should be freaking out too, right? So
I literally was just talking to my therapist about this last week. It's still a problem. I know. I mean, like, so one of the things I feel like a term that I've heard a lot more this past year is self-care, right? Like everyone's like, you got to care for yourself. And I think a question I've been asking myself, and a question I've heard a lot of my friends asking themselves is like, what does that mean? Right? Because I can be in this environment of toxicity, in this negative energy pool, go away on vacation for a week, have a wonderful, relaxing week, and then come back, and I'm still in that negative energy pool, right? So like that day away doesn't really get rid of the problem per se.
Exactly.
And so one of the things I've been working on, and like one of the questions I've been asking myself in the past year, especially around self-care, the questions evolved. So earlier on in the pandemic, it was, what makes me feel good? And I was doing things like watching a lot of TV or playing a lot of video games. And what I found was that after a day of doing that, I was just tired. I didn't feel better. Like after watching 10 hours of Netflix, I wasn't like, oh, I'm ready for the next day, right? I was just like less stressed and tired, right? And then so I started asking myself, what makes me feel most like me? Right? What makes me feel most true to myself? And that's when I started to do things like I would like dance because I really like dancing, and I'm bad at dancing. I'm not a good dancer, but it makes me feel free. It makes me feel like my most authentic self. I would sing songs from my childhood that like songs that my friends don't necessarily like, my husband doesn't necessarily like, but I like them. They make me feel like I'm myself. And I found that to be rejuvenating to some degree. And most recently, that question has kind of pivoted to what makes me feel most human. And I think this has been really affected by the pandemic, you know, when like a work day is me sitting in my house in the same spot for 8 hours straight looking at a screen. Like that's not a thing we as humans did throughout history, right? That's not essential to what it means to be human. So instead of being like, I have to go to the gym, because like, you know, gyms didn't exist millennia ago, or like I have to do this, I've gravitated more towards things like walking outside, talking to a friend, reconnecting with a friend, cooking a meal, focusing on that, just like very core, very basic things that I didn't even realize the pandemic had kind of taken me away from. Right? And so, yeah, I think that's the question I'm trying to ask myself when I'm feeling burnt out or when I'm feeling that negative energy is like, that negative energy is something trying to shift me into a negative space, and it's trying to make me not be myself and not be that center kind of like human being I want to be. So what can I do to get myself to just focus on being human? Because if you're just focusing on, I'm going to go for a walk, I'm going to connect with a friend, I'm going to eat some food, I'm going to nourish my body, it doesn't matter if you answer that email for 5 p.m., right? Like, that's not a thing we need to be human. So it kind of like, it takes it back to basics for me and helps me refocus on not just what's important, but like what's essential to who I am, regardless of all the BS that might be around me.
Right, because I think everything we do, we're looking to be happy and to feel good. So I like that the self-care question, I like that because what comes to mind for me is that it's a continuous practice, right? And so you talked about the go away for a week and then you come back and it's still there, right? The thing is still there. So what is it? Then we get to talking about the practices. I call them spiritual practices. You call them whatever supports you when at my cesspool of negativity, I listen to gospel music, right? And I know that I could go in my office, sing gospel music, right, and make it through the day of it, right? And so it was a way that I was able to kind of block. But let me tell you, I fell into it a lot of times. I was mad as hell at everybody, right?
Yeah.
Because that was the environment. So then it gets to, so what can support us during those times? You know, what things can we do when we are in those spaces, you know? And it gets to the spiritual practices that I always talk about, you know?
When I think about spiritual practices, but I also think about the supports we need when things get rough. I think the thing I struggle the most with, but I also feel like is probably the most important to that is connection, right? And I know we didn't really talk about my spiritual upbringing, but I was born into a Catholic family. I was raised Catholic. When I went to college, it was really interesting because I always say I grew up as an agnostic Catholic because I loved going to church. I was an altar server. I was in a Catholic youth council. I was like very, very active in my church. But I always didn't necessarily believe in God. Like either I questioned God's existence or I just didn't believe in God's existence. But the reason church was so important to me was I really struggled with making friends as a kid. I was kind of like a social outcast. And I really didn't feel like I belonged in my family and my friend group, which didn't really exist or anything. And I just felt like whenever I was in church, I was in community. I felt connected to the world. I felt connected to the people around me. I felt like I had a culture where I knew the practices, I knew the rituals, and I felt some kind of belonging in that practice of community. And so when I went off to college and I was no longer practicing Catholicism, one of the reasons why I didn't practice Catholicism in college was because I didn't have that community anymore, the one that I grew up with. And I was very scared and hesitant about joining a new one. Like the church at my college was non-denominational, so they didn't have Catholic specific services. And I was like, am I going to be the only Catholic? And then I didn't necessarily know other Catholics at my school that I really identified with or felt like I was in community with. And so I found other ways to be in community, which for me during college was sports. Yeah, I spent a lot of time on sports teams, and even through grad school and afterwards, like I would always, because the practice of being in sports practice and sweating with other people and having a common goal and doing that was really important to me.
That community, right? What sports did you play? I saw you.
So many.
You did martial arts too, right? You did everything. I couldn't even keep up with everything, right? I was like.
So when I was a kid, I was a ballet dancer. And then when I went to high school, I did rowing and swimming. And then I was recruited to college for rowing. So I was like a varsity rower my freshman year. And my college was very, very competitive. I was totally burnt out with the varsity rowing. I had several teammates who had been in the Olympics and won medals. So I was competing at that level. And that was just too much for me. Actually, every time the Olympics comes around, I watch it and I'm like, I'm so glad I'm not an Olympic athlete because their lives are very hard. I know how hard their lives are. So I quit rowing and then I did rugby. And then I got a major injury. I got a really bad concussion. I almost dropped out of school. I actually did drop out of school for a while. And then I did Taekwondo. And I've basically been doing Taekwondo for the last decade. So, yeah, a lot of sports.
A lot of sports. So that would be your spiritual practice. So what have you learned? I mean, throughout all of those different activities and sports, what is there a core thing that you come away with from participating in each of those sports that supports you now?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing I learned is that I'm much more resilient than I think I am. Because whether it was, showing up to a dance practice where I would learn a dance and I couldn't do it, and I just I can't dance, to eventually learning it, to I remember my freshman year in college when I was a rower, I would wake up dead because rowing, you start at 5 a.m. Nice. I'm not a morning person. So I would go to bed at midnight. I'd wake up at 5 a.m., have 5 hours of sleep. And I was like, I can't walk. Never mind row as hard as I can. And I would row a personal record. And I was just like, wow, I didn't know I had that in me. And I think it is something about, again, having a common goal, being surrounded by people who want you to succeed, but also are working on the same thing you're working on with you. And I just really learned that, one, it's okay to fail, because you fail it. When you start any sport, you're awful. So you fail at everything, but you're going to get there in the end. And just you have more in you, at least for me, I have more in me than I ever think I do. That, even when I'm dead tired, even when I think I have nothing left, and my coach is run 6 laps. And I was like, oh, I didn't know I could do that right now.
It's you can always go the extra. You always see that there's always more, that you can go the extra.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. I like that. Yeah, I think about all the different sports groups and things that you've done, and I related to community because that was your community at the time also, right? Yeah. And I think about now, we met at Momentum, which is our community. I love the community. I talk about it all the time, right? Yeah. Because I think when we talk about community, that's what we're all looking for. And I love your story of why you stayed in the church, because that was your community and you felt connected to them. And then as we go out, where is our next community? And I always say, my friends always say I'm always in groups, right? But I'm always looking for community and connection with people is what's really important.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk. One of the things that I did want to ask you a question about. I know you were in technology for a while, right? And I read something where you said using technology to support people in their lives, right? Can you talk about what that looks like for you now, using technology to support people?
Yeah. So I work in a field where like I said, I started out as an educator, and I'm still an educator. And I think my scholarly background is more in like understanding how people think and learn. And I think a lot of tech companies, like, so I started out in ed tech, trying to think like, oh, well, I love education. I love thinking about students, and I love helping people think and learn. So one of the reasons I went into education, one of the reasons I went into tech is I was like, if we understand how people think and learn, then we can solve any problem, right? And I'm very, very passionate about education. So I went into ed tech being like, if we understand what the problems are in education, we know how students think, we can create technologies to support them. But all too often, especially in the ed tech field, I feel like there's this misnomer that there's a difference between support and replace. I think a lot of times people are afraid of technology replacing things in their life. Like, oh, I talk over chat instead of talking to my friends in person. Or I'm going to do this educational game instead of being taught by a teacher, right? We think about the technology substituting for human connection. And that's not really how I think about what I think a healthy involvement of technology in our lives is. I think technology, when I talk to product designers and people designing stuff, what I advise them is, what are people trying to do? And what are the things that they're naturally doing in their everyday lives, not using tech at all? And what is getting in their way from being successful? Right. So like I might talk to people about like, how do you like keep dates in your calendar, or, you know, how do you look up something you don't know? Or how do you remember something that you want to, you know, remember later? And I look at how they naturally do that and what's getting in their way. And then I say, okay, well, how can technology unblock the problem? So it's technology as a support to enable people to do the things that they want to do, not as a replacement to substitute for things that are working well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because it makes sense, because that's why people run away from it, because they feel like it's going to take something away. And what you're saying is it's an enhancement, using technology to enhance what we're doing, right? And not take away. I get that, right? And that's the idea. And I know what you're saying, because people think that the technology takes away that human connection, though.
Right.
And that's what they're craving, you know, because think about it, when you did Momentum, we were all together, and that whole being together in
very
that room together, right? It was like everything. Now we've moved to, when we did it online for the past year, right? There was a difference. I say connection was made via the Zoom, and all the training, the distinctions, and everything that we had to learn was there, and you created it a way. But being like, we knew what it was like to be in person, and then it was like to go to to be on Zoom.
Yeah.
And the one thing was that personal connection. We just missed being in the room with each other, the energy of human touching human, right? Hugging, kissing, dancing, being around each other, right?
Because again, it doesn't replace. So when I think of that example, right, like momentum in person versus momentum online, I don't think Zoom can replace hugging somebody, right? Or patting somebody on the back when they cry, or moving around in a physical space and being around other people who move, and understanding that effect on you, right? So I don't think it can replace that. But if we were in a global pandemic and we did not have technology, right, and there would have been no way for us to safely meet in person, what that did was it enabled us to go over that roadblock. So instead of having no momentum, you had some momentum, right?
Exactly.
You had some version of that community that you would not have otherwise had access to.
Exactly.
So again, going back to like what you had said about like the hybrid learning model, like, I don't know. I don't know if I believe it. People are saying that, like, you know, Gen Z, they don't talk to their friends anymore. They only text, or they only talk over Instagram or whatever it may be. Like, I don't know if that's true, but that kind of sentiment really scares me because there's just so much different stuff about a personal connection that you can't get. But talking to my friends who are, you know, a country away, who I couldn't safely get on a plane and get to them, still be able to make that connection because I can call them or I can see them and I can see their new apartment, even though I can't physically be there.
Right.
That is using it to kind of support something that I otherwise couldn't get done. So that's why I like to think of it about like, how are we supporting getting over obstacles instead of how do we replace that which we can already do in a more meaningful way? You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think I love that too, because I love the whole FaceTime, the whole duo, all of that, because it did add a sense of being with the person. It did. Seeing your face, it's like, wow, right? It's so good to see you, right?
I know, it's so good to see you. It's been so long.
I know, right? So it does add that, like you said, it supports, right? I like that rather than takes away. It's like it's supporting the support that we need. There were, as we were talking, we talked about a lot of things, so I take notes. Talk about, you said that when you go to therapy, let's talk about the mental health situation, and what you've seen. And even from the perspective of how are your students doing mentally throughout this, and what kind of support it's given to them on that level.
Yeah. So, as you all know, as everybody who's listening to this knows, this past year has been really freaking tough. I'm not going to swear. I usually would, but I'm not going to. I think we've all suffered from mental health challenges. And so that's been really struggle for me, is how do I support people who are struggling when I'm also struggling and looking for that help? Like, I know one of the things I really struggled with this year was, and I've been to therapy many times. I've been to therapy throughout my life. I didn't even feel comfortable asking for therapy because, like, finding a therapist, figuring out how to pay for it, finding someone to mesh with, that all takes energy. And when I'm mentally ill and when I'm like completely burnt out, I don't have that energy to reach out for help. And at the same time, I feel like it's really hard for me to support students when I'm not okay and I know they're not okay and I don't necessarily have the capacity to always help them in the ways that they need. And I think what also was hard, especially as being a teacher, and then especially as being a teacher during COVID, is, when you're a teacher, my students, I'm meeting them for the first time the first day of class, right? So it's not like we have a connection. And then, we build a connection, we build a relationship over those 15 weeks. But then you go and you get a new batch of students, right? So especially if you're struggling with mental health, I feel like it's really hard for students to like reach out to a professor who's like grading their stuff and they don't know to like talk about what they're struggling with. So like one of the things, and this has always been a problem in my class, but I would tell students like, I have no problem giving you an extension. I have no problem like helping you figure out how to do assignments in different ways. Just let me know beforehand. Like, don't come to me after it's due and you've gotten an F being like, oh, well, I was struggling. Just let me know beforehand. I'll do whatever it takes to help you out. I'll get you there. And students just don't ask, right? And it's really hard. So I had to be more preemptive about like, hey, I noticed I haven't seen some things for you in a couple weeks. Like, how can I support you moving forward? So that was one thing I kind of, and that, again, that's really hard when you're struggling to have that energy to like try to support other students too.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I kind of gravitated towards, especially like in my work as well as in my classroom, was just like being more human. I think a lot of times when you're like a professor at a university, students are like, oh, you're a professor and you're fancy, and do I have to call you doctor because I have a doctorate, and like all this stuff. And I feel like that can divide us mentally. That can make it harder to create connection. And so I tell my students, you can call me Lara, like you can call me my first name. But I also start out like every single class with a like, what's one thing you've been doing for self-care? Or like, what's one thing you're going to do this weekend in order to let go? Or, you know, just like something fun.
Something to connect them.
Something to make them, again, be more human.
Yeah.
And what I found is that, and, you know, like when students gave me feedback, I was like, you know what, this seems like a really lot to do. Like, how can we make sure you're learning the same amount and we're holding you to the same standards without putting as much pressure on you, right? So I kept the quality of my assignments, and I had like a pretty rigorous grading book, but I increased the number of assignments and changed the grading a little bit, so everything was lighter weight. And I just did more to be like, you know, you're going to be sick. You're going to have to miss one of these things or a couple of these things. Like, let's give you some flexibility into what you can hand in to take credit for, or what your timeline is like. So it was just a lot of like acknowledging that we're all struggling, acknowledging that we're all human, and trying to find a way to let students feel like they could connect with me, because I could only help what I knew to help. You know what I mean?
You know, you said something interesting about support. On every level, people don't ask for support, right?
I know. I struggle with it. My students struggle with it.
It made me think that people really struggle with asking for support, right?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that so many people do when support is always readily available, you know, and all you have to do is ask. It's really, really there, but we just don't ask, so we just don't think it's there. So that's something that I think I talk to people about, you know, is you don't have to do it alone. Support is there, right? And it may not look the way we think. Sometimes we might go to the wrong place looking for the support, and then we just totally back away, right? But really, support is always there, right? I think about, for me, I also think about energy and how you're vibrating, what energy level you're on. You'll attract the people that are vibrating at that same level. Because think about it, if you're down and out, you attract down and out people, right? In your life.
Misery loves company.
I know, somebody who will acknowledge how down and out you are, right?
Yeah.
So if you're like up and positive and looking for positive things, those are the kind of people that you're attracted to your life.
Yeah.
So really, you know, thinking about the energy and the vibration, it shifts into, so how do we get there? You know, we talk about, oh, stay positive, have this energy, be this way, and you know, and so it's like, really, how do we do that? And so that's why I like talking about spiritual practices and living life moment by moment, because in this moment, a lot can be going on, but then how you handle it and then shift. And how soon can you shift? And how long do you want to stay in the misery of it, right? And how soon can you shift, right? And how much analyzing do you want to do while you're over here, right? So for me, you know, it's constantly working on choosing to shift, choosing to have a different thought, choosing not to go down that road of, if it's one negative thing, you're going to find 5 negative things, and then you're going to wallow always. So I was like, come on, find one positive thing and build on that and keep shifting and shifting. And so I really work to support people in that shift. Because life is, like you said, it's going to always happen around you. But I also think you attract your energy, and who you are will attract certain people and certain things. Like my motto is, your life is a direct reflection of the thoughts you keep.
Mm-hmm.
So check out the thoughts that you're keeping, and you'll see how life revolves around you.
Yeah.
Um,
I agree. I mean, I have definitely had those moments in my life where I'm just like, I'm miserable and I'm never going to be happy. And I'm just going to keep surrounding myself with more miserable people so I feel better by comparison. But then I'm just, again, in that negative energy cesspool.
Yeah.
And it really took me, whether it was choosing momentum, whether it was choosing to go to therapy, like a lot of those choices were me being like, I've had enough. I don't want to be miserable anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And acknowledging that, because I think part of us always knows there's opportunity for us to be better.
Mm-hmm.
And there's opportunity for us to thrive. And I always thought, like, why do I stick in these like negative situations, like abusive relationships and stuff like that, where it's just like, I know I'm not thriving. I know I'm hurting myself. Like, why do I stay here? And I think it's kind of like, you rather have the devil you know than the one that you don't. Like, the idea of this is miserable, but I know this. I can navigate this. I have navigated this for a long time. And the fear of the unknown, that the shift requires a change, and that change can be scary. So it's going back to what we were talking about before about like the college majors or whatever, about you have to be opening to not know things. Because if you always want to know what's going to happen, you're going to have what you have right now.
Right.
And if you want to have something different from what you have right now, you have to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. You have to be comfortable with the unknown. And that is really scary for a lot of people, including me. And it's something I too am like constantly working on, where if I see myself in a bad situation, I have to ask myself, like, how scary is having to deal with this for the rest of my life versus trying something
or choosing something else.
Yeah.
Because I'm always thinking of it as an adventure. So if I think of it as an adventure, right?
You're so much more, that's a very positive outlook.
So, I talk about the spiritual toolkit, right? And the spiritual toolkit is personal, it's unique, it's your own. And it is the spiritual practices or the things that you use to support you every day. And as we said, when we talk about self-care, it's an everyday thing, right?
Yeah.
What would you say are like the top practices that will go into your own personal spiritual toolkit?
I definitely think one of them is dance. And it's so funny because I've never danced professionally. And I think that's why it's such a core spiritual practice for me. Because my problem is, whenever I have something that I love, that creates community for me, and that gets me in touch with myself, and that gets me in touch with the world, I then turn it into a job. I'm like, oh, I have to be the best at this, right? Like my sports, I have to be the best at this sport. Like I have to win. And then the rejuvenating, the mindfulness, the being in the moment, the ability to do it every day without it wearing me down, it goes out the window because it's now a job for me. And so I think the reason why dance has always continued to be that, like, that thing that makes me feel connected, that thing that makes me feel free, that thing that makes me feel like myself, is I've always been bad at it. And not bad at, like, you've seen me dance. I can dance. I'm not trying to hate on myself.
You're not bad at it, right?
But because I knew I was never going to be a professional, I do it because I know it's for me.
Right. You just do what you feel. You just like
Right.
rest in it. Right. I love
Yeah.
to dance too. So I totally relate to the whole. I used to say I should have been a dancer, right? Because
Yeah.
I
You
love
still
to
can.
dance. I dance all the time. I am a dancer, right?
Yeah.
Not a professional dancer, but I dance all the time. So I love that. So that's cool. That's one. What else do you have?
One of the other ones I think for me is cooking.
Yes, I
So
see that cooking. Wow. So you are really experimenting way out there, man.
oh
How
yeah.
happened? I was like, wow, and it's such detailed cooking,
Yeah.
right? Right.
It gets real intricate. My spice cabinet is out of control because we cook. And the good thing is, I found myself a partner. My husband also loves to cook. And
Okay.
for a lot of people, I feel like it's I'll cook tonight, you cook tomorrow. You know, it's kind of
Mhm.
like a pass off thing. For us, it is a collaborative activity. Like
Mm.
together to create a meal. And there's like nothing I love more than having
Mhm.
friends over and cooking for them. Like it comes from my Italian heritage, but it also comes from like I just love the idea of creating nourishment and sharing it with people that I love and having them enjoy it. But I also love learning about people who are different from me. So we cook Indian food, Chinese food, Korean food, Japanese food, Persian food, Turkish food, Italian, of course, Polish, Greek. Like we try everything. And so our poor spice cabinet has like all these ingredients that you would need for all these very different types of cuisines. And my brother's like, "You're so adventurous." And I was like, "No, I just need to. I want to have it and I want to feel connected and I want to learn about this culture and I want to share it." And like all those things cause me to, yeah, I will like make dumplings and all the dough from scratch. I will make pasta and everything from scratch. But it's the process of making it and then being able to share it with people that I think really, really revives me.
I
I'm
think
actually going to cook
cooking,
right after this. I'm very excited.
right. Yeah, I think cooking too is like a mindfulness, a process in being mindful, right? It's a
Yes.
mindfulness
Yes.
practice, right? Because of you have to really pay attention and you put everything into making the dish really great, right? So yeah, I watch you. I see all the cooking you're doing, right? I think it's really cool. It's very adventurous. And number three.
Number three for me, and one that I have done my entire life, but I'm doing less of now, is writing. As
Mhm.
you know, a couple of years ago, I was writing a memoir, and
Mhm.
I think the turning point I came with that memoir was I didn't want to write it to publish it. I wanted to write it to process the things that I
Mm.
needed to write about while telling that story.
Mhm.
And again, the thinking about it as a memoir and a book I needed to publish, it turned it into a job, right? But
Wow.
ever since I was as young as I can remember, I've like journaled every night. I write, but like in my journal, I don't just, it's never like a diary for me.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
will journal like, I will write plays. I will write song lyrics. I will sketch out movie scripts. I really
Mhm.
like film and cinema, clearly. I write a lot of poetry.
Mhm.
Um, Currently, my newest thing has been trying to learn new languages. So I've been learning a lot of songs in Korean and trying to
Oh
learn how to
wow.
like write new thoughts or think about the same thing in different ways in English, Spanish, French, and Korean, which are
Mhm.
the languages that I've studied. I only speak English, but I've studied all those. So I think it's just for me, it's similar to what you said. It's a mindfulness practice. It's
Mhm.
trying to get like all this stuff that's in my head
Mhm.
and process it and manifest it in a way and just
Mhm.
be in touch with the things that I'm thinking and be in touch with the things that I'm feeling
Mhm.
instead of having to say like these are bad or this is distracting or this is
Mhm.
stressful and kind of push it
Mhm.
away. I kind of feel like the writing helps me work through it. And I just have so much respect for comedians and screenwriters and poets and stuff like that. And so I feel, even though I don't share it all the time, I really feel like I'm in community with people when I create that writing.
As you were saying all of that, I was like, when are we going to see you on the stage? Are you behind the scenes? Or are you taking it to the stage, right?
Yeah.
I know you've done some comedy. What are your thoughts on doing comedy now and taking anything to the stage?
I'm always like writing comedy in my, like I have like running lists of set jokes and stuff like that. I did stand up for a little while before the pandemic. What I realized was that I love the process of writing and I actually really like performing. I do not like stand up. And I think the thing that really does it for me, and this is totally like a lifestyle, find your own way to thrive kind of thing, is like, I don't like going out at night. I don't like going to bars. I don't like being outside my house after 10 p.m. And so the format of stand-up comedy does not align with how I like to live my life. Now, do I know that I could like do it online or have my own comedy blog? Like, yeah, totally. And actually, I started a comedy blog during the pandemic and then stopped when it felt like it was more stressful than stress relieving. So I've tapped into a lot of stuff like that. But I think as a creative, I'm still trying to work out the balance of how do I stay in touch with and practice my creative endeavors in a way that's sustainable without giving myself another to do. Because it very quickly became a thing where it's like, oh my God, I just finished an 8 or 9 hour workday and now I have to write for my blog and like, what are my followers going to say if I don't post and like all this stuff. So yeah, I've been dabbling in and out with that as I check in on my mental health and what kind of balance I need in order to be my best self, to be my most resilient self. So right now I'm behind the stage, but you never know. Maybe in a year I'll be publishing, I'll be performing.
Right. And for me, I would do the performing, and the writing part is where I'm just not enthused about. Writing the jokes. I was like,
I'll write your jokes, Granetta. I'll write for you and you perform.
Okay, I'm gonna call on you because I can deliver the hell out of the jokes, right?
Yeah, I've seen you doing that. Yeah.
So I think we might be a good combination right now, right? You do the writing and I'll deliver them,
Yeah.
But it's been really good. I wanted to get to all of the creative things you've done. And of course, we've run out of time. But I would like to give you a moment, to leave a parting word or share something with the audience that, you'd like to share.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you so much for your time tonight. It's always a pleasure. You're such a joy. You talk about energy. You're such a like wonderful vibe to be in partnership with, right? But yeah, I think the thing that I've been thinking about a lot this year, and the thing that I might want to leave on is just like two things, I guess, that I think are connected. One is it's okay to not be okay, which is a great K-drama, by the way. But it's okay to not know. It's okay to not be okay. That comfort in discomfort. And the going back to what makes us human. That going back to basics, right? For me, that means not taking everything I do and making it a job, not making it a chore, not making it something I have to excel at. And for me, it's also sometimes about mental health, just like I feel so frazzled. I feel like I'm at my wit's end. How do I come back, right? How do I get back to being okay? How do I sustainably live this life in a way that's with joy and peace and ease rather than I have to work for every single thing that I have. And so, being like, just eat, just move your body, just be with the people that you're with and be with the people that you love. And then notice how that makes me feel, right? And notice that is enough, which shows me that I am enough, which then gives me the energy to do the things that I want to do.
Yeah, that is beautiful, and I like that, because my goal is joy, and happiness, right?
Yeah,
And
of course.
living your best life. So it's been really, really great having you on the show tonight.
Thank you.
And so many other things. I will have you back again because I still have so many other things that we can talk about, right?
Of
But
course.
I'm so excited that you joined me tonight. And I will be in touch because I need a joke writer.
Okay,
Right.
let's chat about it for sure.
All right. Thanks. And I'll
Thanks,
be in touch.
love. Have a good
Bye.
one. Bye.
Thank you for joining me tonight on Conversations with Reverend G. And you can find me here every Monday night from 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. on WEMS Radio, bringing you special guests from different backgrounds with different perspectives. You can find me on Facebook as Reverend Grenetta Mason and on Instagram as Rev Grenetta. I'm wishing you a great, great week. And as you know, my goal is to support you in finding joy and living your best life with grace and ease. Have a great, great week.